We have asked in the past what people have been wondering about for a long time. How do members of the Senate and House who make $174,000 a year for their government service become millionaires in just a few short years? Well, now that we have a Department of Government Efficiency, D.O.G.E, D.O.G.E, looking into things, the answer to that question becomes more apparent. Trillions of dollars are going to programs in this country and others around the globe that don't make sense, and some that don't even exist. That's right, some don't even exist. Listen to this. Congress provided $516 billion in appropriations this past fiscal year to programs that had expired under federal law. About half of the authorized appropriations in the report expired at least 10 years ago, and the oldest expired in 1980, 45 years ago. 45 years of funding a program that doesn't exist anymore. Who is getting that money? Inquiring minds want to know. And then there are the nonsensical things around the world that U.S.A.I.D was funding with our tax money. Listen to this partial list. $20 million to create a Sesame Street in Iraq. $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces and business communities. $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles for Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for a nonprofit linked to designated terrorist organizations, even after an inspector general launched an investigation. Millions to EcoHealth Alliance, which was involved in research at the Wuhan lab and helped bring COVID to the world. Hundreds of thousands of meals that went to Al-Qaeda-affiliated fighters in Syria. Funding to print personalized contraceptive birth control devices in developing countries. Hundreds of millions of dollars to fund irrigation canals, farming equipment, and even fertilizer used to support the unprecedented poppy cultivation and heroin production in Afghanistan, benefiting the Taliban. A recently uncovered entry showed that U.S.A.I.D funds were used to push the impeachment of President Trump. How many taxpayers would have voted for their tax dollars to go to any of these absurdities? But to get funded, lawmakers had to vote for the funding. Why would they vote for things like this? Do you think they were paid up front, or was some of that overfunding laundered and sent back to them? But all of that fraud isn't just for overseas projects. The Air Force has been spending $1,300 for each reheatable coffee cup aboard one of its aircraft. The Air Force spent $32,000 replacing 25 cups. A 2-year audit by the Defense Department Inspector General last year found that Boeing overcharged the Air Force by 8,000% for soap dispensers. They overpaid by $149,072. FEMA has been spending millions of dollars that are supposed to help Americans in crisis on illegal immigrants, housing them in luxury hotels, their transportation, debit cards for spending money, and even funding startup businesses for illegals. Now, this kind of news should make every red-blooded American's blood boil. But the Democrats have filed suits claiming that D.O.G.E should not be allowed to see certain payment records, like Social Security and welfare, citing that it puts citizens' right to privacy at risk. Excuse me, but if the government already has the information on the people, then why can't a government official auditing the system see the information? How else can you do an audit? That's the typical Democratic playbook at work. They don't want to get caught stealing, so they try to strike fear into citizens by making false claims. The only ones with something to fear is those who've been acting illegally. We know there are at least billions of dollars in fraud and government payouts. Don't you want to know where it went? New figures show that the federal government made $247 billion worth of payment errors in fiscal year 2022 and $236 billion in errors in 2023. Those figures are according to a government accountability office. These errors, also known as improper payments, include overpayments or payments that should not have been made at all, such as to someone who died or someone who no longer is eligible for government programs. Before D.O.G.E workers were handcuffed by a liberal judge with a temporary restraining order to keep them from accessing Social Security files, they found an active file of a man who was supposed to be 150 years old and still receiving Social Security checks. One has to ask, how long has this person been dead and someone else taking the money? The Democrats keep screaming about privacy and filing suits against the president trying to stop the uncovering of this fraud and waste. I saw a post on Facebook which really gets to the heart of the matter. It was addressed to the Democrats screaming the loudest, and it said, "Why are you mad at the people exposing the fraud and waste? Shouldn't you be mad at the ones committing the fraud?" Well, I guess not if you're the one who has committed the fraud and don't want to get caught. The President and D.O.G.E are just doing what the people of America said they wanted done. And listening to the people is a good thing. Common sense is making a return to Washington.